Ah, Welcome to Broadway and Breakaways, which is at this point becoming a therapy ritual for Nashville Predators fans, or at least for me, to just sit here, gripe, complain, and get to watch everyone else have a lot of fun. Sort of like that SpongeBob meme, if you haven't seen it, where Squidward is standing in the top watching SpongeBob and Patrick run around, and there's nothing he can do about it. That's about what it feels like now being a Nashville Predators fan. You're watching the league kind of run laps around you. Everyone's having a good time. And we're watching all of the best practices get done, some of the worst ones too. But we're a little bit more on the ones that are participating in those worst ones. But, before we get into it, just a quick reminder, my Twitter is at Adam Biesman, ADAMBIESMAN. Really want to continue engaging with as many Nashville Predators fans that are out there. We got a nice group chat going on for the offseason, thanks to Preds Muse. And we will continue to touch into a lot of topics for the offseason as we get ready for October hockey and meaningful hockey to return for Nashville. But it doesn't stop me from watching the playoffs and enjoying the great playoff season that the NHL provides us. It has absolutely lived up to the expectations, the hype. I think it's been way more fun than last year with more overtimes, more close games. So today I'm not going to ignore that. I'm definitely going to talk about the fun drama, the storylines, but of course we have to talk about Nashville Predators. There have been updates, albeit not on the ice, that relate to Nashville. And I think we'll go ahead and start there. The big topics for Nashville are twofold. One, as I've mentioned before, the general manager search, and second, the draft and the draft lottery. I'm not going to get into prospects and kind of the draft board yet. We'll do that a little bit later this summer for some of the early rounds and what we're expecting and the bigger needs that we plan to dive into. Also, a little bit as we continue, we'll talk more about Milwaukee, how we've sent a lot of our prospects down to the AHL. But let's look at the GM position. When I last spoke, there were a few finalists that had been tossed around, and I've been pretty adamant in my support for Brett Peterson to take the role. I am a big analytics guy. I like the idea of someone who brings a successful approach with what was done in Florida, salary management, getting the right players, making a big splash to get someone like Matthew Tkachuk. And I think that we need to see something similar in Nashville. Brett Peterson has done that. Brett Peterson is that new face that Nashville hasn't seen ever. We had David Poile for 25 great years. We had Barry Trotz for another 3 not so great years, but he was a great coach and brought a lot of good memories. And to the ownership's credit, they've done a lot of effort to look externally, but a new name has sort of entered the race, and that's Tom Fitzgerald. Tom Fitzgerald was the first captain in Nashville Predators history. He hasn't been affiliated with the team in decades, but there are two things that still concern me with his ties to Nashville. Somewhat three. The like this tertiary third one I'll start with actually is just that he has history. And I think that Nashville Predators fans are getting really antsy to stop this narrative that we have to win with the original core. We have been around for almost 30 years. I don't think that we owe it to ourselves or to anyone on those first teams that we have to win with their names. I'd love it if we did. It would have been so sick if Barry Trotz, he brought us to our playoff victory. He goes to win the Stanley Cup with the Capitals. He comes back and maybe he pulled together a great team. Andrew Burnett, who scored the first ever goal in franchise history, would be our coach. It's great. It's like fairy tale style stuff, but it didn't work. Okay, let's move on. Let's stop the narrative and move on. But it's not just that Tom Fitzgerald was the first captain. Elliot Friedman, love his coverage. I think he's actually relatively unbiased, gets a lot of immediate scoops, but he said that he's a little confused why Nashville Predators fans are worried about his past affiliation because it's been about 25 years since he was on the team and hasn't done anything since. Well, he did work with Andrew Burnett when he was in New Jersey. Burnett ended up going to Florida for a little bit. And, that was since, and then he came to Nashville. But there is past relationships there. And I'm not saying that Brunette is necessarily the issue, but what I am saying is that I want a GM who comes in and leads first. I don't want them following Brunette because for whatever reason, we're still not making the playoffs. And maybe it's not, again, it might not be coaching. It really might not be. But I don't want that to be I don't want Brunette at the spear of the tip. I want a new leader who brings a new culture, new vision, new way of doing things. And I fear that if Tom Fitzgerald joins, he will feel like he has to fit into that mold a little bit. One thing that I do greatly respect about him is that at David Poyle's last draft in 2023, he traded away, the draft was in Nashville, and he traded away the last pick of the draft from New Jersey to Nashville so David Poyle could have the last pick. And it was fitting because David Poyle did draft him, did Tom Fitzgerald, that is. So, I respect him, but I think it would be a really bad decision for Nashville because we are in the business now of making a new business. Nick Saban and the Haslams are involved, and they should be smart enough to realize that there needs to be something new at the helm. I'm getting my MBA right now. It's one of those intangibles that, I don't care about the X's and O's that they've drawn up. I don't care about their past playoff experience. What I care about is how good they are at building a successful franchise. Brett Peterson's done that. Who hasn't is Tom Fitzgerald. New Jersey hasn't left the second round, I believe, other than when they swept the Rangers a few years ago. And that was probably the most electric that it got for them. Then we have a few other options that are probably still in the pipeline. Scott from the Oilers looks really bad now. I think that the Oilers' first round exit has just been catastrophic, not just for Edmonton, but really for that entire front office. They come in and they are gifted still the greatest player in hockey now, maybe ever, and they can't get out of the first round to a team of young guys who haven't made the playoffs ever in the Anaheim Ducks. And they couldn't fix the goalie situation. Like, they're playing with Connor Ingram. They had traded away traded for Tristan Jarry. And I don't understand why Nashville thinks that we want a team that has taken the best talent in hockey and still hasn't been able to even win significant games, that they're a middling locker room with a very mid-tier rest of the core. If I'm an Edmonton fan, I'm sorely disappointed. Not only did you get Stan Bowman, who's supposed to have a winning record and can't even win, and they were willing to sacrifice their moral ethics for the sake of winning because Stan Bowman was the GM of the Chicago Blackhawks when Kyle Beach was assaulted by a coach and it was swept under the rug and he very much knew about it. And all that happened was nothing to him. He was basically fired and given a show cause from the NHL and comes back. So what does he do? He comes back as granted the best player in the world and then can't do shit. So why should Nashville want any of that? I don't want any of that. Keep them away from us. But don't repeat the same mistakes of old. Another thing that's really confusing right now about Nashville is February 2nd is when Barry Trotz announced he's retiring. I'm recording this now on May 6th. It's been 3 months and 4 days, and we still don't have a new GM. New Jersey has a new GM. Toronto has a new GM. They did that within 2 weeks. Why don't we? I know we tried outsourcing the CAA. I like the idea. For those not familiar, CAA is a big agency that works with coaches, players, etc. And I thought the NHLPA ended up striking that down, or the NHL. I don't remember which organization specifically, saying it was somehow violated league rules. But I like the ingenuity. Okay, that was a while ago. That was like 2 months ago that got struck down. So what are we waiting on? I don't want to miss out on the best talent. And I'm still convinced that the best one is out there. But we're just sitting here. And the NHL draft is now in like 6 weeks. Like all season long, you're working on two things once the season has started: the deadline, trade deadline, that is, and the draft. And the draft takes up a hell of a lot more time because the trade deadline happens pretty quickly. We didn't end up moving that many. I mean, we moved a few people, which is more than average, but a lot of it happens very quickly. You roughly know what your players are worth. You can monitor that. You probably have models that are, if you're a good front office, you have models that are telling you the value of a player, so you know what you're looking for if you were to make a splash. Well, okay. So what? You're spending all this time working on the draft with no front office, with no GM at the helm. I know Barry Trotz is helping out, but he's retiring for a reason. He's retiring probably because Nick Saban said, "You ain't it." Like, so we're just gonna let him continue to run our draft process. Let last year be the indicator. We had the 5th overall pick, and we drafted Brady Martin when Porter Martone, who was drafted 6th, is still playing. He joined a team and helped them get their playoff push and is scoring goals in the playoffs. Brady Martin gets called up to the AHL this year. Called up just for the playoffs. Ridiculous. And we're going to let the same front office that allowed that to happen run this again? It just feels like, we're running the same mistakes over and over. And this year, we have the 10th overall pick. Okay, great. We got a top 10 pick. We were, I think, 15th or 16th in the lottery odds. I think it was, I can't remember right now. I think it was 15th. And okay, sure, we overperformed a little bit. But you know what? Let's look at what actually happened. San Jose gets the 2nd overall pick. San Jose had one less point than the Predators did this season. You got to look at a lot of things. The Predators had gotten a couple more points. They're in the playoffs. But then they also had some games where they just got an unnecessary point, if you think about it. I believe it was Angry Preds fan on Twitter who pointed out that the Predators tied a game with under a second to go against the Flyers this year, proceeds to lose in overtime. It was that meaningless point is what separated Nashville from the 10th to the 2nd pick. 8 picks because of an overtime loss that we didn't need to force. And I'm not encouraging tanking. I'm definitely not. I think it is the worst thing for any sport. I think basketball is suffering from it. Football suffers from it. Hockey, for the most part, teams don't like to tank. But there's a difference between a tank and a rebuild. You don't ever intentionally lose a game. That's pathetic. That's sad, and that needs to get removed from all of our professional sports. Teams, players, people are paying good money to watch a competition. No players are getting paid to try their hardest. So how can you tell them to go lose? But what you can control is setting yourself up for the future. And Nashville is not doing that because we tried to have this fake playoff push, which was a lot of fun. And about 6 weeks ago, I talked about that, but we all kind of knew realistically the odds were never greater than 50 to 60%. And that was the best it got. So we're sitting here watching San Jose get the 2nd overall pick. They already have Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, Yaroslav Askarov, who they got from Nashville. I'm not saying he's actually also going to be some phenom, but they got a young goalie. And we're sitting at 10th. It's disappointing. It's really frustrating when we're sort of in this hockey purgatory. We're always in the 10th to 15th, 16th in the lottery. We're never going to win the lottery like that. We were so close. And people will talk here, like Rick and I were just chatting before. Rick, who produces Don't Puck with Media. Great, Nashville got a 10th overall pick. Well, to outsiders, that might look great. To Nashville fans, we're thinking they're like, holy crap, how do you improve when you can't get like a generational talent? When you can't make serious strides? And now this requires really astute drafting and drafting in depth. And a good GM can do that, but we don't have a GM. We don't know what the front office direction is. And recently, I think it was about a week ago, Vitaly Pichuk, who came from the KHL, who's 24, signs a 1-year deal. He was between the Kings and the Predators. And for some odd reason, he picks the Preds. Highly coveted 24-year-old, very excited to have him. One of those guys that's probably not going to like have to do any minor league time and go straight into the starting lineup. Or maybe he does like a few games just to get settled into the NHL rink because the rinks are different a little bit. And in times it's been a source of challenge for guys that come internationally, like Ellie Tolvanen, who never really adjusted that well. Okay, awesome. But who made that decision? I'm pumped that he's here, but who was managing that phone call? Who in the front office is saying, yeah, this is who we need. We know what we need. We're going to go get him. We don't know what he's worth exactly. I don't think we've seen the terms of the deal. It's probably not a lot, maybe $1 to $2 million. So it's a good value. But I'm just confused as to who's running the helm while we're trying to put together a draft board when we also are now sitting here with only the 10th overall pick. So we really need to be smart and effective with our drafting, and we don't have someone who's at the helm of the draft strategy. Let's say Brett Peterson does come in. He'll have like 6 weeks to put it together. Tom Fitzgerald, they'll have 6 weeks. And I'm sick and tired of hockey GMs who are going to try to sit there and say, well, this guy is big or he's got a great shot. Look at Joaquin Kemmel. He has a great shot. He's not playing a lot for the Predators. And he was a first-round pick back in 2022. And or 21, he's only 21 years old. He was drafted really young. So there's still promise, but he's not producing the way that you would think a first-round draft pick that you got 5 years ago would be. So it's time to lean into the analytics. And I know Toronto's pissed about John Chaika getting picked as the GM there. I've had the good fortune of working with his sister, Megan, a lot through the MIT Sports Analytics Conference. And she's brilliant. She runs Stathletes. They do a lot of work with hockey teams all over the world and beyond, and a lot of the analytics and the tracking. He was hired really early in Arizona. He was 26 years old when he got the GM nod. I'm 30. That's crazy to me to think that when 4 years ago I was going to get brought in to try to run an office of grown adults. And why? Because I studied statistics. Like running this position requires not just knowing how to build the model. That's what your data science team is for. But how do you execute that? How do you communicate that? How do you run trades across the league? And I do think that now, it's like 15 years later, he has a lot more of that experience. The two of them together are very smart. I actually think he's probably learned a lot from Megan. Megan's learned from him. I think that they can complement each other really well. I know Toronto is like shitting their pants over this, but you know what they're not shitting their pants over is winning the draft lottery. And everyone else is, because it really speaks to the somewhat rigged nature that people feel in the NHL. You know, the NBA feels very rigged too when it comes to these draft lotteries. The San Antonio Spurs getting Wemby a few years after they lost their entire core that won multiple championships, when that year Detroit had one of the worst seasons of all time and then had been struggling. The Dallas Mavericks lose Luka Doncic. The next year they get Cooper Flag. It's like the NBA wants to fix that narrative. Okay, I understand that money talks, but if you want to continue to grow the game, get the small markets, get just not even the small markets, just any other freaking market. Toronto has missed the playoffs twice in the last 10 years, just twice. They've won the lottery both times. They got Austin Matthews last time. They're going to get Gavin McKenna this time. They have a lot of decisions to make, though, because they don't have either of their next two first-round picks in 27 or 28 due to trades with Boston and Philly. So as like the small market guy, those who have listened to other pods have heard me talk about some of my disgruntlement towards some of these Canadian markets, specifically Toronto, because they wanted to come in and take Nashville and move it to Hamilton, Ontario in 2007 because they said no one in Nashville gives a damn about hockey. So I'm sitting here and I'm rooting for the implosion. They have no first round picks ahead. So they're going to get Gavin McKenna. Great. He's not going to be Macklin Celebrini because no one is, but he can certainly be as good as Connor Bedard has been, who is putting up numbers, but his team's not going anywhere. The Sharks are already swimming laps, no pun intended, around the Hawks. And the Leafs are just riddled with cap issues. They've got multiple guys on long-term deals who are old, and I mean old in hockey years, so like me. And they don't have a lot of young prospects. They have a fan base that has no patience. They're very much akin to the Yankees in baseball, the Lakers in basketball, or the Cowboys in football. They expect to win every year. And maybe, as Rick and I were just chatting about before this, maybe this is finally the year where things kick in for the Leafs fans, where they say, I don't care about winning because we need to go back to the drawing board. That's possible. That's very possible. I'll believe it when I see it, because it does suck. If you are the biggest market in hockey, you could afford to have a second team there, and you're not going to be winning games, and you're actually going to, at least this time, the expectations will probably be that they miss the playoffs. But who's the coach going to be? Are they going to end up letting Berube ride this? Because no coach has been able to last there. And I'm not saying it's the coach's fault at all. I mean, Sheldon Keefe, I don't think he was a problem. I don't think it was management either. Sheldon Keefe probably had a little bit more to bear than management, because they had a great roster and they just weren't able to close out some games and score goals. They were losing 2-1 in multiple playoff games. But in the end, the players still have to perform. And this kind of makes me think back to this book I read years ago called Behind the Bench, written by I am blanking on his name right now. It will come back to me. Famous hockey journalist. And he talks about how it's unbelievable how a hockey coach, their tenure can come down to bounces. So luck. If two shots hit the post and they're half an inch closer to the net, those are goals. Maybe you win 3-2. Instead, you lose 2-1. You lose the series, you're out. Everything else can be going great. Your penalty kill, your power play, everything can be going just phenomenally. But that's what can happen. And in some ways, it feels a little bit like what happened with Sheldon Keefe. Like, they had a lot of their high danger chances, they had great offense. Things just weren't going in. But in the end, that comes down to the execution more than just perfect X's and O's. That's where hockey's a little bit different than something like basketball, because, when basketball, you can really control the ball. There's a normal amount of friction. In hockey, you can get weird pucks. There are a lot of sticks, skates, things like the flukiest things can still happen. So it's really a lot about how you react. But Toronto is in this mess because the expectations of being the biggest market make it so that people don't have patience. And that's, as a Nashville fan, I'm like, all right, look, we're struggling ourselves, but at least you guys are too. And it's now a colossal failure because you kept thinking that this is the year and you kept buying all these assets and trading for more and more players. And now it failed on itself because you, as a market, couldn't allow your GM and coach to cook. You couldn't let them do it. We go back even to Mike Babcock, who now should never be allowed near NHL teams for a lot of abuse towards his own players. Unfortunately, that's not unique to Mike Babcock in the NHL. But it just shows that even with a Hall of Fame coach like him, they weren't able to sniff a Stanley Cup. And it's just sort of, I think everyone, even the Canadian teams, are just like, yeah, screw Toronto. Like, let them reap what they sow. And that's what they're going to have to do. And they're going to have to probably get rid of Austin Matthews. I can't imagine Austin Matthews is sad about that. He still puts up crazy numbers. In some ways, he's a lot like McDavid with his team. He's a high performer and other guys just don't show up. Whereas McDavid continues to do something similar. But then the question is going to be, where do they go? You need someone that can take on the cap space and is willing to give up a haul. There are a few teams that I think people will look towards in that area across the league. And these are going to be teams that are young, that probably have their core. They might have a strong prospect that they're willing to give up in some future picks, where they're not worried about, someone like their next couple first round picks because they feel confident with where they are with their young guys. Some of the names that immediately come to mind, especially that were linked to McDavid, would be like Montreal, Anaheim, maybe even Buffalo. Teams that are finally out of their little resurgent slump, or to get out of their slump, had the resurgence, and now they're building. And they're competing, and they're looking good, and all three of those teams are in the second round. They might not all make it out of the second round, but imagine you get a scorer like Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid. You give up some talent, fine, but that will certainly compensate. And a lot of these teams have the cap space because their teams are young. And I think it would just be good for hockey too to see the talent go somewhere and win. And I feel for Connor McDavid more than anything, is he is facing a scenario where he could possibly never win a Stanley Cup. He's still got several years ahead of him, but he's now been in the league for over 10 years. He's been in 2 cup finals, hasn't won. He's 30 years old, and he has where he is right now has no shot of making it happen. So anyways, this has all been like a little bit of a long ramble of a frustration on Toronto as to why they're getting this gift. But even still, my thesis is that they got this gift, but it's still not going to be enough. And they should draft McKenna. They will draft McKenna, but they should probably look to trade a lot of other assets. And, in some sports, you might say draft the first overall pick because you need more help. But McKenna is one of those, he would fall more in the Celebrini Bedard bucket than other first round picks. So you got to keep him. He's young. You got to keep him. But it's so frustrating that they get this gift, and that Nashville still gets to sit there in 10. So before I turn to the playoffs, the last thing I want to talk about is sort of this combination of where we are in the draft for Nashville and where the GM search is. And if you look around the league, look at some of the teams that are in the playoffs right now. And I'm going to take Montreal as sort of this key example, and then back to Toronto for a second. Montreal made the cup in 2021. I know it was the bubble year. I know the season was different. You can say it didn't exist. It doesn't matter. But in the end, they still won 3 best-of-7 playoff series to get to the finals. Didn't work. They blew it up. They had to. The next year, they were terrible. They were actually maybe the first team to win the cup and not make the playoffs in either forever or ever. Okay, but they recognized what happened, and they blew it up. And Nashville was still riding guys like Matt Duchene, super fun, great player. He's still scoring with Dallas. Luke Cunnin, Nick Cousins, just some random depth guys. And they made the playoffs, and then they lost in the first round to Carolina that same season. A lot of double overtime games, super fun. I had a great time watching them, but I knew that team wasn't going anywhere. And that same Nashville team has probably been in existence since that's 2021. Nashville's made the playoffs 1 more time since then, and we lost to Vancouver in 5. And now Vancouver, poor them, 32nd in the league, didn't even win the lottery when they were by far the worst team. Montreal ended up, they're in the second round now. Montreal has rebuilt, and they're stronger now. I don't know, they're not going to win the cup probably, but it doesn't, to already be in the second round in 2026, 4 years after they realized they needed to blow things up, and they're only going to get stronger, and they've got great goal scoring and a young goalie. And now they have the ability to maybe go out and get a McDavid or Austin Matthews with a big trade, and it wouldn't hurt the team. It would truly be a strong asset. It's so frustrating for Nashville to watch that. Well, we still are 3 months and 4 days into picking our new GM. And that's why it's also super frustrating that Toronto, whether intentional or not, kind of packed it in, had a shit year, and then they win the lottery. I'm not saying Nashville would have won the lottery if we also had a shittier year. The lottery is weird that way and rigged, as we've sort of discussed. But we could have acknowledged where we were and been a little bit faster in the rebuild. And now the team has announced that we're still competing next year. Competing for what? Like the first overall pick, the last spot in the playoffs, to then get dealt by the Avalanche just the way that the Kings were. It's 4-0 and it wasn't close. Like, come on. And also, who's making that statement from management? Again, we don't know who's running the show there. And if Barry Trotz says that, to me, that means nothing. But the longer we wait, the harder it is to make these decisions and to really put together a good draft. Maybe we're even able to move some players for 4 picks in early future years when the offseason really gets into gear. But Stamkos really wants to stay. Ryan O'Reilly really wants to stay. We've gone over this in many pods before. So that's sort of where I sit here. And now that the first round's over and you really see that Anaheim's in the second round and Montreal's in the second round and Toronto wins the lottery and San Jose gets the second overall pick and Buffalo's in the second round. And, really the only team that I think who has significant more gripes to have would be the Red Wings, because they're sticking with Yzerman. They're 2 years into what should be now into the playoffs post-rebuild, and they keep not making it. And there seems to be even more misdirection, and they probably need to move on from Yzerman. But in a very similar way to Nashville, they don't want to move on from like a legacy Hall of Famer who won cups for the franchise. We haven't even won a cup in Nashville, so I don't know what type of glory history we're like imagining other than the cute fairy tale side of it. So let's get real, boys. Let's rebuild this. Let's bring some pride back. Let's bring the energy back to the Nashville Arena and, show the NHL why it's such a great barn. That ceiling is flat at Bridgestone. The sound reverberates like crazy. When Philip Forsberg got the game-tying goal against Anaheim in Game 3 of the 2017 playoffs, the decibel level was the second loudest at that time of any indoor sporting event except for the Kansas Jayhawks in Allen Fieldhouse. It was around 129 decibels. That is like deafeningly loud. And we haven't even had anything close to that level of excitement since then. In 2018, they won the President's Trophy, they got the curse, lost to Winnipeg, and that's it. And it's time to bring that pride back to Nashville. The Titans are going to be the ones that try to do it. And, they're going to get their new stadium up in a year. And they might become the pride of the town again if Nashville can't fix it. They've sort of been granted this window of shit play from the Titans where they can really fill that void, and all they've done is return no favors. So that's going to be my soapbox for what Nashville has to continue doing in the offseason. And in future pods, we'll start talking a little bit more about who Nashville can expect at 10th overall, if there are any hidden gems, and to really keep diving into the Milwaukee postseason. It's great. Milwaukee in the AHL, they've had some awesome runs. Woohoo. But in the end, I don't care at all about how the AHL playoffs go unless it means that we are seeing a true pipeline of success coming from there. So let's change gears and talk about the more fun part about hockey, the part that we love, the part that any hockey fan loves, the part that even non-hockey fans love compared to most other playoffs, which is hockey playoffs. They are a buzzing. And we had some awesome ends to the first round. First, as I said last time, Buffalo is the team that I see the most resemblance with in Nashville and how we can sort of get that tie to them. And they're living up to it. They finally squashed Boston as an anti kind of blue blood team. It's great to see Boston also potentially be in some trouble. They also have a bit of an aging core and are used to winning a lot. And just like the Celtics too, both are out in the first round. And Buffalo gets to survive. And you see their fans have earned it, and they've waited so long to get to the second round. And it's great. It's just awesome for the game. I think I saw this statistic a few days ago that if you look at the last several Stanley Cup finals, the number one market for viewership that was not the two cities playing in it was always Buffalo. They love it. They're right on the Canadian border. They get a lot of fans from Canada who come in. And that's actually something I didn't know, and I'm sort of ashamed to admit because it seems like I should have known this. But before every game, they sing both the Canadian and American national anthems, even if it's two US teams playing each other, because that's how much of a tie they kind of have to the Canadians that are a part of their team. It really shows their connection with hockey generally. And there was a really sweet moment that felt, again, similar to Nashville. Nashville used to have, when we were in the playoffs, making deep runs, we would have country music stars come out and sing the anthem. Well, in Buffalo, they were singing the Canadian anthem, and the mic goes out, and it's a raucous cheer of singing "O Canada," which just felt like this amazing spirit of goodwill. Again, they're playing Boston. They're not playing Montreal. Well, now they are, but they're not playing Montreal. They're not playing Toronto. They are playing another US-based team, and yet everyone there still shows that utmost sign of respect for the entire league. And I think that how can you not love that? Like, that is the sort of spirit that is so cool about Buffalo. There were some also great videos when they were a lot of the fans outside when it was 35 degrees and kind of starting to snow a little bit, and they knocked the fences down from their watch party, and no one ran through, no one trampled. They all just worked together while all the dudes have their shirts off in this freezing cold weather. And that just seems like to be their spirit. So it's really, really great to see that energy. Unfortunately, they do have to play Montreal. And I say unfortunately, not because I actually think, given how Montreal eked out the first round, Buffalo, their offense can create some issues, and they play pretty good defense against Boston. But I like Montreal too for the same story reasons, that they committed to the rebuild, they got there, and one of these two teams is going to have to pack it in after the series. But both of them should be very excited about the seasons that they've had, that they finally got there, and both will have the support of the entire hockey world. Whether they're playing Carolina, which is most likely, or the Flyers. Sorry to Alex if you do end up listening to this. But as much as people are happy maybe to see the Flyers back in it, it's good for hockey. Philadelphia sports are always the big bad wolf. And until Montreal starts being a dynasty again, I don't think they're going to have a target on their back quite yet. So that, Buffalo, good for them. Let's talk real quickly about Montreal and Tampa, because boy, was that series electric. Multiple overtime games. No one won 2 games in a row. I'm watching game 6 with some Montreal friends, and a huge bummer that, they looked pretty good. They have a lead. Tampa starts to, the ice tilts in Tampa's favor. And then in overtime, it was like nonstop Tampa onslaught, and Tampa wins the game. And it just felt like, holy crap, they got to go back to Tampa. Game 7 at home for Tampa, and Montreal hasn't been able to move the puck or get any possession. Like, this looks horrible. Well, it did. It was atrocious. They had 4 shots on goal in the first period, and then for the first time in franchise history, they didn't have a shot on goal in a period of a playoff game. So they entered the third period with 4 shots on goal. Most people here who are probably listening at the 38.5-minute mark still are aware that a good hockey team on offense is probably getting 30 shots on goal a game, at least in the mid-20s. Even a bad one still getting at least 15 to 20. All you got to do is put a puck on net. And they didn't get a single random shot, even as they're just entering the zone on net in that second period. Tied at 0, though. Next goal could win it. Well, that's what happened. Montreal is able to sneak in a goal. Then it became, I actually think it ended up being 1-1 because Tampa tied it. And then Montreal sneaks in a goal with around 6 minutes to go on a backboard off the goalie's back. And sometimes that's how you just got to get it to work. If you're not able to run your offense, pucks on net, tricky angles, and they stole a game. I mean, you knew that the next 7 minutes of that, whatever it was left, it was under 10 to go. You knew that the ice was going to tilt in Tampa's favor for the rest of that game, and they were not able to crack it. And after the series, for the third year in a row, John Cooper takes to the press conference and says the hockey gods weren't on our side. And now things are getting interesting in Tampa because Andrei Vasilevsky, their goalie, said, I am sick of saying that. 3 years in a row we've said that. It's not just about luck or bounces now. Something has to change. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong at all. But they can talk about that. He's not the GM. It's not his problem. He's still been a great goalie. Montreal gets to march into the next round. So, the other series, Carolina had fully just swept through. Ottawa, things are going to get interesting for Ottawa because some of those games were actually really close, like getting into overtime, 1-goal games, but in the end they lost 4. Now Ottawa has to look at the Brady Tkachuk sweepstakes. Are they going to trade him? Are they going to sign him? I'm not opposed, honestly, to Nashville making a run for him. Florida was dog shit when they traded for Matthew Tkachuk. They're different players. They're very different players. But they were young on term. And I think that it would show that Nashville is committed to getting some proven experience. He's still in his early 20s. Go get someone that can help anchor the offense. Give some depth. Spend some freaking money. A lot of Nashville fans are probably not going to want to see that. But again, everyone thought the Flames won that trade with Florida. And that trade petered out just so fast for Calgary. And now they're one of the worst teams in the league. And Florida didn't make the playoffs this year. That's because of all their injuries. They still have the same core. They're going to come back so strong. They're probably going to be a top 3 favorite to win the East this year. And if they're not, I'm putting money on that. That's not gambling advice, just for the record. And then the last other series that we had was Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which ended up looking in the East, which ended up looking like it could have been a complete catastrophe for Philly. As a Nashville fan, we continue to hate Pittsburgh because they stole a Stanley Cup from us. I mean, they won it, but the refs didn't help with some of the late antics. But so Philly up 3-0, blows the next 2 games. Dan Muse, former assistant coach with the Nashville Predators, I'm impressed that they managed to sneak 2 out. But Pittsburgh's actually in a very shit situation, similar to Edmonton. A lot of older guys on term. They don't have a high draft pick. They don't have a good goalie. They don't really have a great future. I don't think Dan Muse is a great head coach. They are probably not going to make the playoffs next year, and they haven't left the first round in a while. Pittsburgh as a whole, their entire sports has struggled. Now, the West, though, has been, again, the Montreal, Buffalo, great series. The others were not, super fun. The West had some very interesting ones. Let's skip Colorado. They did what everyone thought they were going to do. They would have done the same to Nashville. And the second round has already started, and they've put up 14 goals in the first 2 games. They look like an absolute juggernaut. They're doing this to the Wild, who got 3rd in the Central, who beat Dallas, who got 2nd, only a few games behind Colorado. And I think a lot of people were probably, I'd say it was 55-45. People would have thought Dallas would win. Minnesota had great goaltending. They didn't against Colorado in games 1 and 2. They both Wallstedt and then Gustafsson. I'm very confused by some of the coaching decisions that they let Wallstedt go the entire game 1, giving up 7 goals. I think 2 were empty netters at the end. And then they decide to make the goalie change. Okay, great, cool. You got a good second goalie. He gives up a goal on the first shot of the game. Minnesota's got to come back with a vengeance. They're down 2-0. I'm worried for them. I think it would be awesome to see Colorado get taken down, but I don't the way that they play hockey is also just enjoy it, even if you don't want to root for them. I don't want them to get another cup before Nashville does, but there's just something gorgeous about how they rebuild. They got McKinnon, McCarr in a way that every team should follow, and now they've sold out at the deadline, so they don't have a lot of picks to come. But hey, if you win a second cup in 5 years, it's probably worth it. But the Minnesota-Dallas series was awesome. And one thing that was really cool is that Minnesota beat Dallas in Game 6 the same night that the Timberwolves beat the Nuggets in Game 6, both in Minnesota. So really cool for Minnesota sports. They're a great sports city who care deeply about their teams. And it's awesome for hockey also that the Wild are good, but the Wild haven't made it super far and haven't won a cup before. They're also like relatively new. People think they've been around longer because they're in Minnesota. They're actually younger than the Predators. They're right around the same time, but they were in Dallas for at first. Okay, so the interesting ones now. Anaheim took care of Edmonton. Fine, I touched on that a little bit earlier. Vegas is a very interesting case study. I think, honestly, not even just for hockey, but for businesses generally, to bring in a new coach so late in the season who doesn't get a chance to really gel with the team. I don't think he's worked with many of the players. And now they rip it. They get into the playoffs. They get home ice for their first series, and now their second one because they're playing the Mammoth. They played the Mammoth. The Mammoth had a lead in the first 5 games going into the third period. That had happened 28 times in NHL playoff history. 28 times where the same team had a lead entering the third period in the first 5 games of the series. 28 times that team won the series. Not always in 5, but they always won the series. In the 29th time, Vegas won. And that's credit to Vegas for knowing that they were always in it, pulling it together, and winning the game. But I feel for those Utah fans, like the boogeyman that must be blowing third period leads. And then in game 6, fittingly, they just never had the lead. And sometimes that's what happens in the elimination game when the best team is like finally, it's clear. They figured it out. Maybe not best by a mile, but they figured it out. And now Vegas is playing Anaheim. And that was a really close game 1. Really close. Controversial calls. Anaheim ties it shortly after Vegas takes the lead, gets an empty netter late in the third. I would not rule out Anaheim from making a dangerous run here. Don't forget that for like a good month, even into when the Tortorella came, Vegas was struggling significantly on offense. They were still trailing a lot against the Mammoth. If Anaheim is able to get some earlier offense, I think that Vegas will struggle a lot more. And it's crazy to me that Anaheim has a shot at going to the Western Conference Finals in their first serious time back in the playoffs after a huge drought. I mean, Nashville and Anaheim used to be this bitter rival. They played 3 times in the playoffs. Nashville's won all 3. The last time was in 2017. And Anaheim really hasn't done anything in the last 10 years since then. And so it's impressive how they've kind of pulled it all together now and have a shot at making this run. I'm rooting for it, which is crazy. And that's partially because Vegas has felt like a bigger enemy of Nashville hockey than Anaheim has in the last 8 years. I could wax poetic about this forever, but it's really annoying to me that Vegas was given such lighter rules for a draft expansion team that they were able to make the cup. Not saying that the GM wasn't good at the expansion draft. He was. They significantly overperformed. But here's what Nashville was facing. For the expansion draft, teams were allowed to protect, I believe it was something around 11 forwards, 7 defensemen, and 2 goalies, roughly in that ballpark. You only dress 6 defensemen, 12 forwards, and 2 goalies every game. So we're talking about guys that are healthy scratches for games or minor leaguers. Vegas had it a lot easier. Teams could either protect 3 defensemen, it was 3 defensemen, 5 forwards, and a goalie, or 4, 4, and 1. Well, great. In 2017, Nashville made their Stanley Cup run. They lose, and just like that, they are already faced with expansion. So they have to protect or make a strategic decision as to who to protect. And they lost James Neal, who was pivotal in the run. James Neal ended up not having much more of a career, fine, but hindsight's 2020. It's so annoying that Nashville had to go 13 years before they finally won a series. Vegas wins a series in their first try and then goes to the Cup and has already won a Cup since then. Then, when the Kraken start to come into existence, Vegas is protected from giving over any of their players. So it just feels like they're given this uneven advantage. And as a result, like as a Nashville fan, I'm very, and I'm sure Columbus and Minnesota fans probably feel similar because it's taken us so long to be relevant. And Vegas got an easier pass that allowed them to skip many years. So it's just frustrating, and I'm all in on Anaheim trying to squash them and force Vegas to finally go through a spell of bad hockey, to know what it feels like to struggle, to be in hockey purgatory, because I'm curious, like their fans genuinely have never seen a bad year, like a really bad year or bad stretch. And they're going to be due. Every team is due, but I'm curious, like everyone talks about how great of a sports city Vegas has become, but how great, I think the sign of a truly great sports city is when the team is bad. What happens? Do people stop caring? Do they stop listening? Yeah, people are going to stop attending games. Tickets will get a little bit cheaper. That's everywhere. But are they still invested? Are they still watching? Are they still listening? Are they still complaining? Complaints mean they care. I don't know if Vegas will. It sucks to lose. But that's one of those beautiful things for Nashville is we know what it felt like, so that when we finally got a taste of the good stuff, you just want to come back for more. And as much as Nashville fans, especially in this group Twitter chat that I'm in, everyone's harsh. That's because we want it so bad. And we're still going to sit there and break it down, and we're out here. But I don't know if Vegas is. I haven't spoken to people who operate like that, and I think that it'll be a real test for them. Seattle has had a little bit more of that reality hit home, but they're still popping. Seattle is a good sports city, and they're going to get their basketball team back too, the Sonics, and I'm happy for them, and I know many people who are eager for that. So, as we're in the second round, the teams that we're still pulling for is Nashville. I gotta say, is Buffalo. We have no trade skin in the game where if someone gets out earlier that they're gonna we get a better pick. None of that. It's just for the storyline. Root for the underdogs long term. Winner of Buffalo, Montreal is gonna feel like the underdog. Out east, out west, it's anyone but Colorado. Ideally, also not Vegas. It's really hard to want to actually root for someone in your conference, which is why I'm much more partial to Buffalo. And yeah, but it's still been a lot of fun. There's a lot of intensity, violence, huge saves, energy, and it is not as stressful to watch when your team's not in it. So that's one of those silver linings that we get. But I can't wait for the moment when my spring is taken over by trying to squeeze in, playoff hockey, especially when I'm next year, I'll be sitting at a desk late at night, but I'll still be able to pull it up on my phone and stream it and tune in. And, that's the thing that keeps the hockey community bumping is no matter where you are, for any sport, if you care, you're tuned in, and there are a lot of other people doing it. And I hope that anyone who's listening to this feels the same way when they can tune in and grab context on the Predators. Maybe they're feeling the same level of gripes and just know that other people are sharing those experiences. So thank you for joining. Next time, we'll be on to the Western Conference Finals and the draft conversations and AHL playoffs. So still a lot more to watch as a bystander, but we'll do all we can to enjoy it. Until then, go hockey, I guess, and we'll keep an eye on the GM search. Thanks, everybody.
Swagger down the street with your red lips and funky beat. You better hold your head up to the sky. I'm gonna roll with you till the day I die.